brief the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Riley Benj, staff to the committee. Before you is Senate Bill 5435 concerning residential rent increases under the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, RLTA, and the Manufactured Mobile Home Landlord-Tenant Act, or MHLTA. Some brief background. Under the RLTA, an increase in rent is generally not allowed to become effective before the end of a rental agreement, and landlords are required to provide 60 days written notice of an increase in rent, except for subsidized tenancies where 30 days notice is required. Under the MHLTA, a rental agreement is generally not allowed to contain any provision that allows a landlord to increase rent during the term of the rental agreement, and in most cases, a landlord must provide 3 months written notice prior to a rent increase. Under the bill before you, a landlord may not increase rent for a tenancy subject to the RLTA or the MHLTA during the first 12 months after a tenancy begins, and during any 12-month period in an amount more than the rate of inflation or 3%, whichever is greater, up to a maximum of 7%. A landlord may increase rent beyond the rent increase limit under the following circumstances. First, if the tenancy is within a new building or a publicly funded property. Second, if a landlord is experiencing significant hardship complying with the maximum annual rent increase. Next, if the landlord has paid for certain improvements that cost more than 4 months' rent, the landlord may increase rent up to 7% or 4% plus the maximum allowable rent increase percentage for that year, whichever is greater. And finally, if a landlord does not increase rent in a 12-month period, the landlord may bank that rent increase capacity for future years. Under this banked capacity program, a landlord may increase rent by additional 3% for each year since the last rent increase. The bill before you requires that a landlord must provide annual notice to tenants of rent increases, possible future rent increases, banked capacity, facts supporting any claimed exemption from the rent increase limit, and tenants' rights regarding rent increases. Finally, a tenant who is charged and pays rent in excess of the rent increase limit has a cause of action against the landlord to recover damages and attorney's fees, fees and costs. The bill contains an emergency clause and takes effect immediately. A fiscal note has been requested but is not yet available. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Rivers has a question.
Thank you so much for such a complete description of the bill. Is there any provision in the bill that accounts for inflation or property tax increase, increases in minimum wage, that kind of thing?
Okay, we need to have some decorum in the committee room, please.
So rate of inflation is measured by the CPI, and that is what is tied to the maximum rent increase. It's either 3% or the rate of inflation, whichever is greater.
So this year when we experienced the, 9 or 10% increase, that would mean that rents would have gone up 9 or 10% as well?
There is a maximum of a 7% increase.
So then the landlord would just eat the remaining cost of inflation? Okay, thank you.
Senator Fortunato. Please, we
Madam
really
Chair.
do need, we're going to try to get it through as many people as possible, so it's really helpful if we don't have interruptions. Thank you.
So I guess my question is who determines significant hardship?
Under the bill, the Department of Commerce would establish a program, and they would be responsible for determining significant hardship.
Right, so there's nothing in the bill that deals with that. We have to, it'd be a regulatory thing that Commerce would put together.
That is my understanding.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Gildan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was looking at the part that said publicly funded or owned properties are exempt from this. So does that mean that that properties that are owned by governmental organizations or agencies could raise the rent more than the cap established or applicable to private owners?
That is my understanding, that a tenancy in a federally funded property owned or operated by a public housing authority or a property that is funded through a housing assistance program are not limited by the rent increase limit.
Okay, thanks.
Senator Gilden, I believe that's because they're already limited. Of course. All right, so before we go to the prime sponsor to give her remarks, we're going to start calling people up, and we have some chairs up here reserved. So, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first panel, which is all in Zoom, so we'd like to have staff pull them in, Tanya Hennon, Larkspur, Langston, and Sol Villarreal. Next panel on deck, in Zoom, Albert Angelo. In person, so if you can come up, as the good Madam Chair said, Chester Baldwin, Chris Dobler. And we can look ahead if Mike Hoover, Dan Pididita, and Brad Tower want to come forward too. You're a couple more panels away, but come on forward so we're ready. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now we'll move to Senator Trudeau for her remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I really appreciate the questions as well, and that offer me food for thought in terms of what to do with this policy. Nobody has come to me with any compromise solution, so I will just offer that as we start, but always open to that. My name is Yasmin Trudeau, representing the 27th Legislative District, and I brought some unifying policies in front of you. This is not one of those, unless you are one of the many, many renters facing constant uncertainty about whether there will be a rent increase that'll push you out of your home, or if you are debating how you will feed yourself and your children or make your rent. I brought this because it directly and immediately addresses an issue that is crushing folks in our communities, and that's the dramatic and unsustainable rent increases we see across our state. We've heard it in every presentation. We've heard it in every work session that we've had. We heard it earlier from some of the folks that were on the panel. In past years, I may not have brought this proposal, but it's just simply something we can't ignore. We can't ignore the constituents that are dealing with this. And that said, I want to start by thanking every person in here for your time. Every person. Your perspective, your humanity, your passion, regardless of your position on this bill, is seen, heard, and respected, and I want you to know that. This isn't blame or accusation. It's an effort to resolve a problem and an issue that we keep hearing over and over again. In my city of Tacoma, we've witnessed some rents raised by 30%. That's not sustainable. And this is keeping people from finding adequate housing. It's pushing people out of their existing units, into their cars, and onto the streets. It's a vicious cycle because once we have someone pushed out, we also know there's no affordable supply to seek an alternative home. And one statistic I want to offer to emphasize this point is that for every $100 increase in average rent, homelessness increases in the community by 9%. We are all paying for that problem. I don't care if you're a renter or a landlord. We are all suffering from that problem. And my constituents have stories that they have shared with me, and they're incredibly heartbreaking. There's a single mother that faced a 20% increase and literally had no way to pay for that. She now lives in her car, awaiting a housing voucher. And the issue with housing vouchers, and I really want to make a point here, for those that are most vulnerable on the margins, you have to have, in order to use a voucher, the rent has to be a certain amount. And the rent increases in my community are higher. So people that have housing vouchers now have useless vouchers because they cannot find a unit that is within that price range. So this is something that folks are dealing with every day. What is that person supposed to do? We've heard about the workforce shortages, and yet rents have reached levels that have created substantial hardship for our nurses, our teachers, and our much needed workforce. You know, this is forcing delays in life decisions, delaying when and if these folks can plan to have children. Considerations are significant to the average person, and in many cases can be truly crippling, especially as inflation and other costs impact how much people have at the end of the month for basics like groceries. I am not unsympathetic to the emotional response to this policy. I am not. I understand the anxieties of landlords, and I would like to offer that my in-laws are mom and pop landlords. And honestly and candidly, they are furious that many of the bad actors reported are large property management companies and respectfully request that they are distinguished from them. But they also understand why I'm bringing a policy, and they support a solution to the issue of rising rents. They are good people, solid people, and they have children that are facing the issues of raising rents, and they know and have told me that something needs to change. We have many proposals to build housing. They will take years. This policy is presented to you as relief for our working people and families right now. It's not blame, it's not accusation, it's a real problem. As I mentioned, my door's open to talk about what compromise and solutions can be had. I haven't heard any. But I commend, if this isn't the policy you support, what is the policy that will help these folks? I haven't heard an alternative. So I commend this policy to you, and I look forward to the spirited discussion and opportunities for collaboration so we can truly address the way the rental increases are overburdening people in our communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Trudeau. And Senator Fortunato has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Increasing the housing voucher amount, would that solve a majority of this problem?
Well, some of that problem, Senator Fortunato, is also federal. So unfortunately, we can't resolve that completely at the state level.
All right, thank you. Okay, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If staff could put a 1-minute timer on the docket and for everybody testifying. So sorry to limit it to 1 minute, but we have nearly 100 people signed in to testify. I will just say out the gate, there's no way we're going to get to 100 people. And so apologies in advance if we do not get to you. If we do not, even if we do, we really encourage you to send us written testimony as well. So thank you in advance for your patience. All right, let's start first on Zoom and hear from Tanya Hennon, Larkspur Langston, and Sol Villarreal. And again, in person, have Albert on deck and Zoom, and our folks are already here in the front. Tanya.
Hi, my name is Tanya Hedden. I'm a residential real estate agent and a landlord of 4 homes in the Olympia and Seattle area, and I'm here to speak in favor of 5435. My colleague Saul is going to offer some great perspective on what a rent increase looks like. For a renter, it's in stark contrast to what the monthly housing cost stability that we have when we're homeowners and we can rely on mortgage and that payment just changing with taxation. But what I've had the luck to enjoy additionally, besides cost stability as a homeowner, and I see my real estate buyers seek, is the greater socio-emotional stability that also comes with putting roots down. There's value to our kids being able to stay in the same schools with teachers who know them and their needs. We get to know our neighbors over time. We get the chance to build community with them. And that community, when rich relationships grow, we start to look out for one another and have those bonds when emergencies happen. Rent stabilization helps our renting neighbors enjoy the benefits of being a part of community long-term too.
Thank you, Tanya. Larkspur. Larkspur, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Hi, my name is Larkspur Langston. I live in District 37. I'm testifying in support of Senate Bill 5435. I'd like to honor my mom, Nadine Van Stone, who was a social service provider in Spokane for 25 years and from whom I inherited the property that makes me a landlord, which is located in Legislative District 3. I have one property and I'm still figuring out how to be a landlord 2.5 years in. I had a rough transition with tenants and continue to have my challenges. And I still think that the bill is reasonable, fair, and workable while making sure my family can pay our bills. My mom cared deeply about being a responsible community member and being a fair landlord, and I know she would have supported this bill too.
Thank you, Larkspur. Sol.
My name is Sol Villarreal. I'm a residential real estate agent in Seattle, and I also own 2 rental properties here. I'm supporting SB 5435 also. I believe that every Washingtonian deserves to be able to live in a safe, affordable home. Building more housing will be an important part of reaching that goal, and it's one that I wholeheartedly support, but while it's necessary, it's not sufficient. Each of you on this committee is a homeowner, as am I. As homeowners, we enjoy all the benefits of having stable, predictable housing costs, and I think that's something we can take for granted. I'd like to invite each of you to close your eyes for a few seconds and imagine that your housing costs will be increasing by 50% starting in 60 days. Would you still be able to afford your housing? Would you have to move? If you did have to move, could you afford to stay in your community, or would you have to leave? I don't know about you, but I'm glad that's something I don't have to worry about. And it's something I don't think renters across the state should have to worry about either. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sol. Before I start the next panel, if we could get on deck in Zoom, Pedro Alfaro, Craig Peck, and Brianna Vasquez, that would be great. So let's go to Albert Angelo in Zoom. Albert.
Hey, good morning, Madam Chair and Vice Chair Frame, members of the Housing Committee.
My name is Terry Anderson. I'm the director of the Spokane office.
Oh, Terry Anderson, we need you to mute.
Hello?
Sorry, hold on 1 second, Albert.
Okay, no problem. Sorry about that.
Can we restart the timer for Albert? Thank you.
Good to go?
Go ahead, Albert. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, folks. Well, good morning. Albert Angelo III here with Al Angelo Company. We've been a longtime family, multifamily owner and landlord for over 75 years. My grandfather was Mayor of Vancouver in the late 60s, early 70s, and we completely understand the situation, and we feel for everyone. The main component here is the rent control, and I believe it would do some unintended consequences to having, the stabilization and creating more development for Washington State. We're in Oregon, Idaho, Arizona, and since Oregon enacted the rent control laws, we have decided not to do any more development over there. And it just has a domino effect that we see happening here in Washington if we pass this bill. And we're happy to be a part of any further conversations and answer any questions in the future. I know it's a quick 1 minute here, but we respectfully are against this bill.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you. And I should have told Chester and Chris to come forward. And so if you can start, Chester, and then Chris Dobler, why don't you come up to the front too? Thank you. Go ahead, Chester.
Madam Chair, excuse me. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Chester Baldwin. I'm here today testifying on behalf of the Rental Housing Coalition and the Manufactured Housing Communities of Washington. Rent control has failed everywhere it has ever been tried. There is not a success story in this country about where rent control has fixed a housing problem. There's also not a success story where rent control has led to more housing. And in a state that is desperate for housing, short somewhere in the neighborhood of 800,000 units right now and 1 million units by 2044, rent control will kill our ability to build more housing because housing providers and those who build housing will choose to build elsewhere. Additionally, Portland saw a 14% decrease in their rental housing inventory after passing rent control. St. Paul saw a 61% decrease in the building permits from people willing to build housing. Rent control hurts those people that you're not intending to. It hurts single mothers, it hurts low income, and it's actually best for those people who are high income because they are the ones most able to take advantage of rent control because it is not targeted to one population or another.
Thank you, Chester. We need to move on to Chris.
Last thing, rent control vouchers, rent gap vouchers are the answer.
Thank you. Chris Dobler, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. My name is Chris Dobler. I'm a Pierce County woman, our Pierce County women-owned property management company manages over 5,500 rentals. My partners and I are second-generation local families providing workforce housing for over 15,000 residents. We've been housing, maintaining, increasing housing stock for thousands of people for over 35 years. I'm opposed to this bill. Rental rates reflect cost increases for housing providers. Property taxes and utility cost increases are the top reasons why rents are raised. 30% of our properties operating costs have gone to property taxes. I'd like to go off of my speech for just a moment to share something. I'm with the Tacoma Housing Authority Landlord Advisory Group. The question was brought up about the voucher program. I recently testified asking that they increase the voucher rates in our city of Tacoma. We have a great partnership between the city of Tacoma and our landlords, and I'd be more than happy to speak with you, Senator, more to that in your district. We're the largest housing provider in your district.
Thank you, Chris, so much for your time. And with that, we need to move to the next panel. I see Mike and Brad in the front row. Dan, Piedita, you all will just go ahead and come. We're going to do a Zoom panel next, but go ahead and come forward and sit down. All right, let's go to our Zoom panel. First up, Pedro Alfaro, and I understand Mr. Alfaro will be using an interpreter. So if we can have both Mr. Alfaro and the interpreter pulled forward, that'd be great. Mr. Alfaro.
Go first.
Yes, hi, my name is Norman. I'll be the interpreter for him.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
All right. Sí, adelante, señor Alfaro.
My sense is Mr. Alfaro does not have himself unmuted yet. So far.
Creo que el señor Alfaro no tiene quitado el botón de mudo del teléfono.
Or perhaps our staff could unmute Mr. Alfaro? You cannot? Okay.
¿Está bien ahora? Is it good now?
It is. Please proceed.
Okay. Sí, por favor, proceda.
Ok. Mi nombre es Pedro Alfaro. Soy propietario de un manufactured home.
Mi nombre es Pedro Alfaro, soy propietario de una compañía de manufactura.
Exacto. Mi renta ha subido.
If I could ask our interpreter, I thought,
Yes.
could you say that in English rather than Spanish, sir? Thank you.
Sure, I'm sorry.
It's okay,
Yes, my
thank
name
you.
is Pedro Alfaro. I'm a manufacturing company owner. My rent has been increased.
De 4 años, desde el 2019, de 650 a 970.
In 4 years, in 2019, since 450 to 950.
No, 970.
Oh, to 970.
Right. Son 320 pesos más.
It is $320 more.
Right. Lo cual incluye 49.24%.
I'm sorry, I can't. Disculpe un momento, señor Alfaro. I'm sorry, I can't quite hear because of the ringing noise.
Yeah.
Okay,
Ha subido, son $320 más, lo cual es igual a 49.24% en 4 años, igual al 12% mensual, 12.31 mensual.
Okay, well, the increasement has been $320, which is equal to 49.24% in the past 4 years, which is equal to 12% per month.
Ok. Soy un hombre que de 90 años que vive solo.
I'm a 90-year-old man who lives alone.
Que no tengo ningún otro familiar que me pueda ayudar.
And I do not have any other family members that can support me.
Con fuentes financieras limitadas.
With limited income resources.
Y sin trabajo.
And unemployed.
Con el dinero que ahorraría, puedo pagar comida.
With the money that we would save to buy food.
Electricidad.
Electricity. Internet.
Teléfono.
Telephone.
Medications. Healthcare.
Healthcare.
Y gastos de auto.
And auto expenses.
Según sería muy difícil para mí continuar viviendo.
It would be very difficult for me to continue living under these conditions.
And if you could communicate to Mr. Alfaro, we need him to wrap it up. We are way beyond our extra minute for interpretation.
Además, fui forzado a llenar un contrato de más de 41 páginas.
I was also forced to sign a contract with over 41 pages long.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and I would strongly encourage sending the testimony written. It was pretty difficult for us to hear it through the phone ringing, so if you could encourage Mr. Alfaro to send it in written form, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, bueno, vamos a apreciar mucho, ¿verdad? Si puede mandar ese testimonio de manera escrita para que podamos de esta manera atenderlo, porque fue muy difícil escucharlo por el sonido del teléfono que estaba sonando.
Yeah. Okay, gracias, Mr. Alfaro. All right, Craig Peck, you're next.
All right.
Go ahead, Craig.
I'm Craig Peck from Woodinville, testifying pro. I'm a mom and pop landlord retired with 2 rental houses. My wife owns a business. This bill is reasonable. It allows rent increases that exceed expense increases. Our main expense is a fixed monthly mortgage payment. So an annual COLA rent increase is not a problem. And when you add in the IRS gifts of property depreciation and expense write-offs, landlords like me will still do well. Big picture, don't let the rental industry drain our economy and state budget. First, if you want the 40% of Washingtonians who are renters to have disposable income to purchase from Washington's businesses, pass this. Second, if you want to address the labor shortage crisis, pass this. UW economist Jacob Vigder writes that the high cost of housing is why our local labor shortage is particularly bad. Third, if you don't want tents lining our sidewalks, pass this. Finally, if you don't want to budget endless amounts on homelessness, don't subsidize the rental industry by letting them offload to taxpayers the results of rent gouging.
Thank you, Mr. Peck. Brianna Vasquez.
My name's Brianna Vasquez, and I'm pro Senate Bill 5435. I'm a single mother and resident of Renton. In 2022, I was paying $2,049 and received a notice from Greystar Property Management advising me of a 15% rent increase. If I wanted to go month to month, it would have been 112% more. I had to move, and the replacement unit that I moved to requested $6,000 for first, last, and deposit. I drained my savings and went further into debt. Even though I am not low income, this was an exceptional hardship for me. If the bill was in place at the time, I would have been able to have stable housing for my family. I have to move again, but rent options are scarce in my area. For example, I checked my old unit and it's now going for $2,744 last time I checked, on January 22nd. I'm in support of reforms because these increases are unscrupulous, untenable, and should be illegal. Greystar is now facing a lawsuit for allegedly inflating prices. I am a real-life consequence of their actions.
Thank you, Ms. Vasquez. Before I have our in-person panel start next, let's pull up in Zoom Sari Adams, Danya Otto, and Sharon Peavy. And let's start with our in-person. Mr. Hoover, go ahead, or whoever wants to start, go ahead.
Okay, I am Mr. Hoover. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Mike Hoover here today on behalf of Détente Management, who manages primarily manufactured housing communities, which are a bit different than some of the other rental markets. We already have limits in place as to frequency of rent increases, and a lot of our communities are more like a little town. We have to provide infrastructure, et cetera. It's not hard to imagine situations where we could be obligated contractually to provide those services, but be unable to recoup the cost for that. Also, our residents often have equity in their homes, which is not typical for a lot of the rental market. I would like to pose sort of a rhetorical question because as you mentioned, there are good people on all of this, and my people are good people. Why is this happening now is the question I would pose, and I think it has to do with increased costs. I think it has to do with COVID catch-up. I don't think people magically got greedier or started acting in bad faith. I think there is a pent-up backlog for increased cost that is hitting us now, and I don't think it's quite right to make landlords and landowners subsidize that or bear all of that cost. I'd like to address some of those underlying costs before we go to this route on this bill. Thank you.
Brad Tower, go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Brad Tower here today on behalf of the Community Bankers of Washington, speaking against this measure. We have a significant amount of our portfolio in helping those who bring housing starts to this market, and we have strong evidence that this will have a significant chilling effect on those who are willing to bring equity into that. As a double kick, it will also increase the reserve requirements, so it'll make the capital component of financing those projects more difficult to find. There is no, even when you get your own home mortgage, your ability to repay is what constitutes the decision-making tree for the price of that particular capital. We heard earlier this week in this committee about the missing middle and our attempts to create those alternative ways of providing our housing starts, and it's going to take a little bit of innovation, I think, to get the financing for people there, because are those residences, are they income generating properties? But to the extent that we're limiting the ability for those who we're expecting to develop those missing middle units, to the extent that we restrict their ability to actually recoup the cost, you're going to make the price of funding for those developments higher and more difficult.
Thank you. Dan, over to you.
Good afternoon to Madam Chair and committee. I'm here in support of Senate Bill 5190 because I think it's good for the state of Washington. I'm here against Senate Bill 5435 because I think it's good for the state of Idaho. I finance affordable and workforce housing. I've delivered over 9,900 units to the state of Washington since 2010. Projects that we've arranged financing working with banks, life companies, nonprofit lenders. One thing that I'm concerned with is literally 2 years ago, 20% of my business was out of state, 80% was state of Washington. Today it's 50-50, and next year it will be 70-30. 70% will be in Arizona and in Idaho, in markets like Boise and Phoenix. You are competing for equity, and that equity wants to go where there's not rent control. Thank you.
Will you state your name for the record, please?
Oh, of course, Dan Pianita.
Thank you so much. And before I go to the next panel in Zoom, I want to have some folks come in person that are on the next couple of panels. I see Mike Ennis, Ryan Manisker, and a couple panels ahead, Bruce Becker, Gordon Haggerty, and Faye Pretty. If you could just all come to these front rows so you're ready to go and we are ready for you. Over to Zoom, let's hear from Sari Adams.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sari Adams, and I'm here in support of 5435. I lived in Washington, Washington. I've lived here for 20 years. The last 10 years, I've been in a small apartment community where my rent and bills have been paid in full and on time every month. The people in my community are elderly, disabled veterans, low-income families, and single moms. I was disabled at 23 after an accident where a piece of steel went through my skull, followed by brain aneurysm and surgery at 35. My 53-year-old husband is a veteran and disabled after having served in Desert Storm in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, along with his 20 years of service at PDX as airport security. In December, our rent went from $976 to $1365, an increase of almost $400 or 40%. Our combined fixed income of $1275 does not cover our rent. Extreme rent increases force good people out of their homes, and especially those on fixed incomes. Our communities, city, and state deserve better. Let's help better happen this year.
Thank you so much. Dania Otto. Is Dania available? Just dropped. Okay, well, hopefully Dania will be able to reconnect. Sharon Peavy. Is Sharon available, team? Team, is that Sharon, perhaps? Sorry, all
Okay.
having technical difficulties. Sharon.
Can you hear me?
Is that Sharon? Yes, Sharon, go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Sharon Peavy, and I live in Vancouver, Washington, in a 55-plus manufactured home community. I paid $140,000 cash for my home. 4 or 5 years ago, space rent was $525 monthly. We have no amenities. We now pay $1,100 monthly for our property, but expected to pay all upgrades on this property. Water and sewer are no longer included, and rent was never adjusted for the extra expense. Corporate landowners take classes with the national outfit that teaches how to buy manufactured home properties, up the rent, separate themselves from all communication from homeowners, and provide minimum maintenance. If homeowners lose their homes in the process, they benefit from that as well. Corporations do not want rent stability because when homeowners are priced out, it's more opportunity to raise rents to the new owners. It's all about greed, and homeowners are used as pawns. With 170 homes in our community paying $1,100 monthly, landowners make enough,
Sharon,
or perhaps
thank you.
should learn better bookkeeping.
Sharon, I need you to wrap up. I'm so sorry.
Please, it's up to our leaders of the state to hear our plea for change. Support bills of fairness.
Thank you,
Support
Sharon.
bill.
Thank you so much.
Support our bill.
All right, to Dania Otto. It sounds like Dania's reconnected. Go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee. My name is Dania Otto, and I live in Vancouver, Washington, 49th District. I am pro for SB 5435. I am a community member and work with many Chuukese families as community advocate and liaison that are struggling today like I am. In 2001, I moved into my home. My rent was $1,850. In 2022, they renewed my lease. Month to month, it would increase to $400. I couldn't afford it. To renew with a 2-year lease, it would increase $150. I had no choice but to renew my 2-year lease because it's all I could afford. I have 6 children, all of school age, so my plan was to spend 1 year in my home I am in and then move to a home with better schools since I live in the rougher side of Vancouver. But I had to make a decision between my children's getting a better education and keeping a roof over my family's head and a home that I can afford. Please pass SB 5435. Thank you.
Thank you, Dania. Before we go to the next panel, Ryan Mankinster, if you're here, please come up to the front. And let's also have ready in Zoom for the next panel, Caroline Hardy, Teresa Staley, and Deb Wilson. But let's start in Zoom, and we'll go to Corey Brewer, and then Mike Ennis will be after that. Corey, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for providing the Zoom option. Sorry, I couldn't be there today. For the record, Corey Brewer. I've been a property manager for over 10 years. I oppose this bill, and I'd be surprised to learn that anyone else out there is more directly responsible for more day-to-day management responsibilities for single-family houses in King County than myself. The overwhelming majority of people that I work with are mom and pop housing providers, and we have very good relationships with most of our tenants. In my limited time today, I'd like to request personal meetings with as many committee members as possible on February 7th, I'll be down in Olympia with other members of the Rental Housing Association. I'm particularly interested in meeting with legislators who support this bill. I'd like to discuss the pitfalls. Senator Cooter, a couple years ago, you recommended to me that I read the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond. After reading it carefully, and it was heartbreaking, I'm further convinced that this type of legislation, while well-intentioned, is a stubborn march in the wrong direction.
Thank you,
the housing
Corey.
affordability crisis needs a more intentional and targeted approach.
Thank you, Corey.
Take your questions. Thank you.
Mike Ennis, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Mike Ennis, here on behalf of the Association of Washington Business opposed to Senate Bill 5435. We oppose rent control because of its negative impacts on housing stability, housing affordability, and the overall economy. The housing crisis in Washington is a result of a combination of factors, and the most important of which is lack of supply. Artificially capping rent increases reduces investments in housing creation, further restricting the supply and leading to a wider gap in affordability. Rental housing is an economic jobs driver and employs more than 6,000 Washingtonians statewide. Landlords are housing providers, and we should be finding ways to encourage their growth, not restricting it. Please reject the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And let's go to Ryan here in person. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Ryan McKinster, Director of Government Affairs for the Washington Multifamily Housing Association. We are a statewide association representing over 5,000 member companies, 2,000 plus apartment communities, and over 308,000 rental units, and thousands of your constituents as our employees. Thank you for allowing me to speak on their behalf today. Although there are many studies that show rent control doesn't work, I want to highlight one that applies to the bill before you. A study by Capital Policy Analytics in November 2019 modeled the effect of a 7% price cap on apartment rents across a number of cities in Seattle, or a number of cities, including Seattle. The study found that under a 7% cap in Seattle, 86% of future housing may become infeasible. It shows that approximately 15,500 units of needed housing may not be built because they do not pencil out. And maintenance and repair spending will also be drastically reduced, which puts an additional 32,000 units at risk to deterioration. With a projected 53,000 additional units needed, this is a large 48,000 unit risk of loss that must be part of the conversation. This loss is something this state, our cities, and your constituents cannot afford. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your time, Ryan. All right, before we move to Zoom, I want to call the next two in-person panels to come to the front. If we could have Bruce Becker, Gordon Haggerty, and Faye Pretty literally come up to the microphones, though you're not speaking just yet. And then behind them, I want them in the first row, Rick Glenn, Michael Gustafson, and Patricia Herdermis. Just want everybody to get organized. But before we do that, let's go ahead and hear from our folks on Zoom, Caroline Hardy, Teresa Staley, and Deb Wilson, starting with Caroline. Caroline, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Carolyn Hardy, and I live in a manufactured housing community in Aberdeen. I am pro for 5435. We moved into our mobile home in 2008 with dreams of our forever home. 2021, bad news hit the community that the park had been sold to a large property management company. Shortly after the sale, we came home to a note on our door that rent would increase $150 and we would be responsible for garbage service, which is another $25 a month for garbage pickup. $175 a month, 37% increase. Wow. We own our home, but lease the land it sits on. It's time the government take a stand. Our home cannot be moved. It is not mobile, it's immobile, and would cost thousands of dollars to move. Rent increase has turned our joy to dread, worrying that the next increase will force us to find a new place to live. We've worked hard for over 55 years.
Thank you, Caroline. Caroline, I'm sorry your minute is up. I'm so sorry. I need to hear next from Teresa Staley. Teresa, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead.
My name is Teresa Staley, and I represent the homeowners residing at the Rainforest Estates in Forks. I'm here in support of rent stabilization because rent in my manufactured housing community has just been raised from $350 to $1,000 monthly starting March with 0 amenities. Our small city of 3,830 people do not have affordable housing. We have teachers living in their cars, and essential healthcare workers cannot find places to live. My doctor has prescribed anxiety medicine for me because of panic attacks the huge rent increases caused me, and my acid reflux is working double time. My senior mother and disabled sister also live in this community. One of the seniors is 72 years old, getting $1,400 a month, and has stated to me she feels like putting her gun to her head because of this situation. Please support Senate Bill 5435. It will allow reasonable rent increases, but prevent predatory landlords from fleecing us. Thank you to all who support this bill, and I hope these testimonies compel those who don't.
Thank you, Teresa. And next, let's hear from Deb Wilson.
Okay. Good afternoon, sponsors and members of the Senate committee. I'm Deb Wilson. I live in a manufactured home community in Aberdeen. We're homeowners and we're stuck paying rent on the dirt under our homes. Our rent has recently gone up by 37%. Many of us are skipping meals, cutting down on medications and other expenses so we can afford the rent. The prospect and stress of increasing rents has, I believe, caused premature death of some. These rent increases mean our forever homes are being taken from us by economic exploitation. And with no feasible place to move, a tsunami of elderly, disabled, and bedridden individuals is heading your way, resulting in heavy demand on social safety net services. We're your parents and grandparents. We worked hard and we saved. We earned our forever homes. Please give Senate Bill 5435 your full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Before we go to our in-person panel, if we could call up on Zoom so they're ready, Casey Burton, Kathy Neva, and Patricia Wilder. Let's go to our in-person panel, who is very well organized here. Bruce Becker, go ahead.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. My name is Bruce Becker. I'm a small landlord. First thing I'd like to mention is I felt that the work session testimony was fairly one-sided, and I'd invite members of the committee to ask questions about the topics there to any of the people in this room practically. I'm a small landlord, a mom and pop landlord in Seattle. I'm very concerned about the regulations that have been going on that are restricting the ability of landlords to be effective. For example, my costs in the single family home that I rent, the tax cost went up 24%. 1 year, just as it became impossible to reflect that in increased rent. And there's a catch-up factor. Many other costs have also increased accordingly. Remember, the goal is to make investing and providing rental housing economical. It has to be efficient. It has to be dependable.
Thank you, Bruce.
You really need to be able to do that, and I think the legislature should do that.
Thank you, Bruce. Gordon, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Gordon Haggerty. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I'm speaking in opposition to this bill today. I've been a small housing provider since the 60s when I was a college student at UW. One of my first buildings was a fixer-upper that we bought and rolled up our sleeves. We had little money, a lot of energy. So we applied sweat equity, which is a banking of wages for future income and the hopes of that. And so it took us the better part of a decade to go through and turn it into a slumber to a highly desirable apartment building now that is still in very good condition. We maintain it well. We have good relationship with our tenants. The banking option of rent that is proposed here would not work for us who are working to improve the facilities over years. And so I'm concerned about the next generation of young people who are coming in who need to apply that sweat equity as well. So thank you.
Let's go ahead and hear from Faye. Faye, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Faye Prady. I am a 14 years experienced small landlord. We don't need rent control. We can solve the problems. This is my thoughts. We need two housing markets. First one is public housing. Edith Emerald conducted research and wrote books to show that private housing market was incapable of supplying decent housing at rents and prices that low-income families could afford. As I started low-income housing in 2008 in Tacoma, I had a huge loss. I left this market 3 years later. My personal experience proved she is right. Second one is private housing market. We need a more friendly policy to create more housing. More housing means more jobs and more property taxes. Government has more financial ability to take care of low-income families. Additional housing in the private side will create affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye, very much. Before we go to Zoom, let's have to come right up to the microphones, Rick Glenn, Michael Gustafson, and Patricia Hadermis, so that they're ready to go. But before that, let's go up to Zoom, and let's go to Casey Burton first, and then we'll hear from Kathy and Patricia. Casey, go ahead.
Hi there, can you hear me all right?
We sure can, please proceed.
Excellent. Hi, my name is Casey Burton, and I'm a senior staff attorney at the Tenant Law Center.
So Casey just froze. So team, while that gets rectified, I wonder if we should move to Kathy and Patricia.
Babe, is your Wi-Fi messed up?
You froze, are you back? You are back.
I think I'm back.
Okay, let's go ahead, restart the timer. Casey, go ahead, and if it freezes again, we're gonna go to somebody else and come back to you. Go ahead.
Perfectly fair, thank you. I'm Casey Burton. I'm a senior staff attorney at the Tenant Law Center, where we provide legal advice and representation to tenants in King County who are facing housing instability and evictions. And I am in support of this bill. I understand that the legislature has tried to stabilize things for renters through just cause protections, but unfortunately, until the legislature does something about rent gouging, a lot of those promises under just.
All right, Casey, we're going to ask you to instead submit your comments in writing. Your internet connection sadly is unstable. Let's move to Kathy. Thank you so much. So I understand Kathy and Patricia are in the same room, so if we could go to them and start with Kathy.
Hold on. Okay, there you go. Hello, my name is Kathy Neva, and I'm talking to you from Walla Walla, Washington, where I retired after 31 years with DSHS in Seattle. To volunteer for the homeless community, which I never thought I would be in threat of being part of. We need to set a precedence in this state to protect people that are elderly, vulnerable population, and for all people who can't even get into housing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Patricia, go ahead and please start by identifying yourself as well. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Patricia Divine Wilder. I am pro SB 5435. I live on Social Security and have a small IRA that I should be drawing $120 a month from. Instead, with the rent increases, I am drawing $350 a month to pay my rent, and that's still not enough to live on. What happens when that runs out? My neighbor, Diana Gabriel, was going to testify with us today, but she's in the hospital. She lives on less than I do and qualifies for subsidized housing, but the wait list is 3 to 4 years. We've been looking for more affordable homes, but in Walla Walla, the vacancy rate for one-bedroom apartments is 1%. Also, our lease includes a penalty if we rent month to month, so finding a less expensive place in a 2-month window is a huge challenge. Please support this bill and give renters the critically needed protections. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy and Patricia. Appreciate your time today. Before we go to our in-person panel, if we could get ready in Zoom, Clifford Cawthon, Robert De Gregorio, and Guillermo Rivera, that'd be great. In person, let's go to Rick Glenn.
It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Rick Glenn from Yakima, Washington, president of the Yakima Landlords Association, representing over 600 landlords opposed to Senate Bill 5435. 3 hours of travel for 1 minute of fame. This bill will regulate us by consumer price index. 7% does not reflect reality. This electrical outlet cost $8 before COVID. Today, it's $30, 375%. Landlords deal with real costs, not indexes. You tie rents to fake numbers, then get ready for fake housing or no housing. Bureaucracy also requires time. To landlords, time is money. You spend thousands of dollars going through the bureaucratic process of getting this paperwork together, and we're just supposed to eat it? It's impossible. The problems are real. I'd love to talk to you and talk about it. And if February 7th works, I'll be here, because these are problems that really need to be fixed, but this isn't the solution.
Thank you, Rick. Let's hear from Michael. Michael, go ahead. Go and grab that microphone.
Michael Gustafson, Kitsap County. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the time. You asked for a solution. First, you must define the problem. High rents are caused, obviously, by limited supply. Limited supply is a direct result of construction regulation caused by our Growth Management Act. It now takes up to 4 years to obtain a housing building permit in Kitsap and Snohomish counties and many others. We now have 500 pages of stormwater regulation to contend with. A staff person can't know it all. We have huge restrictive buffers, no proof of environmental harm has been offered. Decreasing motivation for housing providers only increases homelessness. Rent control is just another Band-Aid. Let us build housing in rural areas so we can satisfy the demand. I'm a landlord of 50 years. I'm a board member of Kitsap Alliance of Property Owners. Been on Kitsap County Planning Commission for 10 years.
Thank you,
I strongly oppose this bill.
Thank you, Michael. Patricia, nice to see you in person. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair Cruder and committee members. I'm Patricia Hundermus, and I'm also representing the Landlords Association. And I actually agree with everyone here that is opposing this bill. I would like you all to remember that landlords for 2 years were unable to raise rent during the moratorium on evictions. We were also unable to collect rent from many of our tenants. And I do know that a lot of our members did raise the rent after that happened because of the losses that they received. So I'd like you all to remember that effect. Basically, I had a tenant, and I'll wrap it up really quick, but I had a tenant, a landlord come in yesterday, an elderly Hispanic fellow, and he said that his kitchen range 2 years ago to replace it was $450. And he said now it's close to $900 to replace that same model of a range.
Thank you,
so
Patricia.
if there is some way we could stabilize our costs if you're going to stabilize our rent.
Thank you so much. Before we go to our panel in Zoom, which is going to be Clifford Cawthon, Robert Greg Gregorio, and Guillermo Rivera, if we could have come all the way up to the microphones in person, Robert Hardy, Laura Jansen, and Kathy Janey. I will note, based on the clock and testimony time, these will be the last 6 testifiers we get to unless somebody's not present in the room or in Zoom, and we go to the next folks. So for folks that are on the line that we will not get to, as we said at the beginning of this, we really encourage you to submit your written testimony. With nearly 100 people signed up, there was just no way we could get to everyone today, but we would love to hear your comments. So let's go to Zoom and start with Clifford. Clifford, go ahead.
Yes, perfect. There we go. Yes, hello. Can everyone hear me?
We sure can. Please proceed.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So thank you, Chair Cooter. Thank you, committee members, for hearing my testimony. My name is Clifford Carl Cawthon. I'm the Advocacy and Policy Manager for Habitat for Humanity, Seattle, King, Kittitas counties. And I would like to strongly support this bill. So Senate Bill 5435, I think, well, I know from personal experience is necessary in order to stop really capricious, rent hikes. But more importantly, that if you can't afford your rent, you cannot afford to become a homeowner. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing people essentially being forced to either find a way into home ownership or find themselves homeless. So this is common sense, and we know from experience from our homeowners that this will allow people to be able to save up and afford to buy a home one day.
Thank you, Clifford. Thank you. Over to Robert.
Yes, thank you so much to the committee for giving me this time to speak. I'm a current medical student at Washington State University and also representing Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. And the reason that we as physician advocates support this bill is because the housing crisis is a healthcare crisis. I want to speak about one patient that I worked with who was on a fixed income, had a 30% rent increase, and ended up losing housing because of that. He was also an insulin-dependent diabetic, so was unable to keep his medication at temperature and had severe adverse effects because of that. And this is common with many diseases. With diabetes, severe adverse outcomes are 28 times higher for individuals who are unhoused. And from the 2020 point in time counts in both Spokane and King County, it shows that rent increases are the third most common reason for individuals becoming homeless. So in summary, housing is healthcare, and supporting rent stabilization is a strong support to also ensuring the health and wellness of our communities across the state. Thank you.
Can you please identify yourself for the record?
Yes, my name is Robert Decker-Borg.
Thank you very much. And over to Guillermo Rivera.
Good morning. My name is Guillermo Rivera with Eastside for All. Eastside for All is a racial equity and social justice organization based in East King County. We bring forward input from communities that are underrepresented on the decision-making bodies. And I'm here to talk in favor of SB 5435. Last summer, we brought the voices for unrepresented communities to city councils in Redmond, Kirkland, Issaquah in support of tenant protections. Nearly 40% of Washington households are renters. Many of these renters came from immigrant communities and will continue renting for years to come. We hear that our communities are having to make difficult decisions to move in with their parents, their adult children, or their friends because rent increases. Families want to live where they work, where they want to worship, where their kids go to schools. Immigrant communities, regardless of their income, want to have rent stability and prepare for their future with dignity and respect. Please pass this bill that is rent stabilization and not rent control. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. All right, and to our final panel in person, let's start with Robert Hardy. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair Cooter and bill sponsor, and to all of our fellow Washingtonians that are entertaining this very difficult task and trying to solve a real problem. I'm the president of America's Choice Real Estate, and I must oppose this bill. Even Governor Jay Inslee stated before you all, we need more housing supply. This bill is nearly twice as restrictive on housing providers than even California's rent control laws. And as state legislators, you cannot control the escalating property taxes and other costs associated with operating real estate. Rent control has been around for 44 years in San Francisco and New York, and as a result, they have the highest rents in the nation. Data from Rent Cafe shows that San Francisco is 50% higher than Seattle at $3,400 a month for rent, and residents of Manhattan and New York pay over $4,500, nearly double that of Seattle. If this is enacted, we're heading down a slippery slope that renters will never recover from. Today, Seattle has 42 cranes in the sky, which is more than New York and San Francisco combined, and that's how you build 1 million homes in 20 years. Rent control does not work for the public. Evidence clearly shows if we restrict supply, rents go to the sky.
Thank you, Robert. Laura, go ahead.
Thank you, Senators. My name is Laura Jansen, and I oppose this. Rather than telling you what everyone else is saying, I'm going to talk about alternatives that were requested. I am an architect, and we all know Governor Inslee is proposing $4 billion investment in housing bonds, but we also have other options available to us. Alaska does low-interest loans for housing so that they can get investment. We have a bunch of office buildings that are vacant that are not going to go back to office buildings that could be turned into housing. We need to fix the permit process. We need to bring back legal boarding houses because a lot of the mentally ill people need additional support in their housing situations, and that would help them. We need to explore public-private partnerships, and we have an ineffective rent programs that where we have persistent fraud, where we need to increase voucher programs, and we need to target subsidies for the neediest people first with those subsidy programs.
Thank you, Laura. Great. And Kathy, to finish us out.
Thank you for allowing me to provide testimony on this important.
Kathy, can you pull that microphone closer to your mouth, please, so we can hear you?
Okay, can I start over?
You sure can. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to provide testimony on this important legislation of rent control, which I oppose. The desire to provide affordable, quality housing is a shared goal in a thriving community. Most property owners decide to provide affordable housing just like the sponsors of this bill. I've been a small property owner for the past 35 years in Seattle. I own 2 buildings and recently just sold one of my buildings because of the continual massive increase in regulations. I started making improvements on the other building that I own, and the costs came to $25,000, and that didn't include turnover, maintenance, repairs. It was just improvement. Where am I? Okay, so I'm wondering if within this legislation, if you're going to limit the ability for utilities to raise their rates, tax assessors to raise the taxes, because in the past couple of years, my taxes have gone up 35% and 40%. Right now, all the other improvements that I've wanted to do are now on hold. I just can't afford to do them, and I encourage you to work with housing providers to come to to achieve the same goal is all I'm trying to say.
Thank you. And I think we missed your name in the beginning, so could you state your name for the record, please?
Really? Kathy Jenny.
All right. Thank you. With that, back over to you, Madam Chair.
All right. I want to thank everyone who has testified today. It is a very challenging issue, but we appreciate all the input. And I want to thank my ranking member. I want you to know that we held questions from committee members so we could get to as many of you today to hear as much as possible. So for those of you, again, I'll just reiterate, for those of you who didn't get an opportunity to testify, please submit your written testimony. There's an online portal to do that, and you have 24 hours post this meeting to get that done. And we appreciate it. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.